Today we're talking about Marc Spector, Jake Lockley, and Stephen Grant. And that's because today we're talking about Moon Knight. We're going to have a lot of fun when we get into the psychology portion of this video. And before we get too far into this video, I want to shout out Frank Geo 8783. He left a comment requesting that I do a video on Moon Knight, and I really appreciate that. Any suggestions on who I should talk about really helps me create a list of future videos. I do apologize that it took this long to make this video. In the future, I'm going to do these a lot faster. So I hope Frank Geo 8783, hope you're still alive. I hope you're still able to watch this. And I thank you for your patience. As usual, we're going to go over Moon Knight's athletic ability, his combat training, his diet, his cardio, his psychology. We're going to look at his realism. So is he having a physique that reflects the activities that he engages in? And we're also going to see, is that physique at all attainable at any point without steroids, without drug use? Then we're going to talk about a possible routine. If Marc Spector, Jake Lockley, whatever, was a real person, what routine would he engage in to get at all close to his comic capabilities without breaking himself? One thing I want to throw out is that I don't have a ton of exposure to Moon Knight. This was really the most I've ever read his comics. I first saw him in Marvel Ultimate Alliance. I've seen him in crossover comics with Spider-Man or Avengers or whatever. And then, of course, I've seen his photoshopped memes. But from what I've learned with my reading, Moon Knight has always had a violent streak. He would play war games in his backyard with his brother, which bothered his father quite a bit. His father was a rabbi, so he was a little disturbed to see his son clearly enjoying violence. The highlight of Moon Knight's character is that he has dissociative identity disorder. It seems like it took a while for the comics to really lock this in. I do see some theories that this was always intended, and I go with that. As Marc gets older, he develops another personality, and his parents are like, okay, maybe he needs some help. So they send him to a psychiatric hospital. Now, Marc stays there until the death of his father, where he's able to be released to go to the funeral, and he goes and joins the United States Marines. So Marc, as soon as he gets freedom, escapes. Him being a Marine served as an outlet for some of his more violent tendencies. After serving as a Marine for a while, they discovered that Marc lied on his intake forms and that he should not be there. So he is discharged and finds his way into Baghdad, where he becomes an underground boxer. With as much as underground boxing has weight classes, my understanding is that Marc operated on the heavier side and was a heavyweight boxer. Right there, we see that Marc is a very talented fighter. We'll get more into that later. After doing a little bit of underground boxing, he becomes a mercenary. He does some brutal and cruel things until he teams up with Bushmaster. At that point, he takes things too far. He tries to stop Bushmaster from killing somebody that Bushmaster wanted to kill, and he is injured. With that injury, he finds his way to Khonshu's altar, and Khonshu locks in his deal of healing Marc. In exchange, Marc will become an avatar for this god. He will become the Fist of Khonshu. I personally find that very interesting. Marc is already established to have a Jewish upbringing, so for him to have a religious upbringing where his father is a devout believer, and then for him to go and serve and work for another god, I feel like there's a lot of dissonance here that, honestly, the comics are not picking up on. They do talk about it every now and then, but I just feel like believing in a god and serving another god, that's wild. There's a lot of potential there. Super interesting to me.
I tear through the cloudless night, just like the moon.
For Moon Knight's athletic ability, we are seeing that he officially weighs 225 pounds and he is 6'2". Moon Knight has the stats of a linebacker, and that really shows in the physical things that he does. He's ripping doors off of cars. He is demolishing steel metallic doors as if they were nothing. They're no obstacle to him. And then he's lifting grown men over the top of his head. Ripping doors off of cars, I don't know about. Kicking in steel doors, probably not realistic. But tossing a 200-pound individual over your head is completely within the realm of possibility. I say 200 pounds because that's about the average weight of an adult man. More than likely, Moon Knight deals with people who have a decent amount of muscle, decent amount of mass on them. So we can say 200 pounds, probably on the lighter end, is what he's throwing over his head. But we see people like this lifting way more weight. And what is really being done here is they're doing a push press. The overhead press, the shoulder press, the military press tends to be a very strict movement down to your collarbones, up over your head. Deltoids, triceps, those are all the muscles that are truly involved. With the push press, you're using more of your body. It's a little bit more athletic. You'll see this in CrossFit competitions or strongman competitions. It requires a little bit of a dip down and then a push up. It takes a lot of coordination with firing of your legs, of course a strong core, and then strong shoulders, strong triceps to push that weight up. When you do it correctly, when you're good at it, you can push quite a bit more weight than what you can strictly overhead press. And that fits in really well with Moon Knight's combat. He's fighting, he's moving athletically, fluidly. He's using a lot more muscles to get that guy over his head. And then of course, Moon Knight is very agile. He says that he wears white so his enemies can see him coming.
Camouflage is stupid. I want the enemy to see me and be afraid.
This is crazy. That's insane to say, but it is probably true. And so because of this, he probably takes more gunfire than normal. But that said, he dodges most of it. He is not often hit, not often clipped. So even with that extra gunfire, he's moving fast enough to get out of the way. We see here that he's just embarrassing Captain America and Black Widow and a nerfed Tony Stark. He's jumping around like a grasshopper and making them look like idiots. His agility is on the higher end. Along with strong deltoids and triceps, which we see in his version of the push press, we also see that he has tree trunk legs. Seems like it's happened more often than you would expect, but he tends to land on vehicles and completely destroy them in the landing process. This requires that his legs are strong enough to dissipate that force. When his legs meet the metal and his legs don't crumple, the metal does. That is a sign that he has very strong legs. And realistically, if you look at the way he's landing with his legs straight, this would wreck his knees. This is entirely unrealistic. Don't do this. If his knees were a little bit more bent, like what you see with parkour, the way people land from higher falls, then perhaps, maybe, it would be a little bit more realistic. He'd be able to dissipate the force a little bit better. And we also know that through Wolf's Law, through strength training, specifically in this case for the legs, we're talking about things like back squats, front squats, leg press, really anything where there's extra load more than body weight. That's going to make your bones stronger. When we lift weights, it makes the bones in those areas stronger due to them adapting to that extra force. We can also see that this is a phenomenon that happens back for parkour athletes or for runners. The repeated impact over and over and over again, if you're eating well, allows for our bones to be rebuilt stronger than they were before. I'm going to bring it up as it's relevant, but right now we're just going to say that his athletic ability shines when we look at the Marine Physical Fitness Test. The Marine Physical Fitness Test requires that you do some push-ups, some pull-ups, some planks. I think they got rid of the crunchers that they used to have, and running. The fact that Marc passes that fitness test gives us an immediate baseline for the future of this video. So we'll touch more on that, but at the moment, since we know that Moon Knight was a Marine, we can use his physical fitness test to get a sense of his general strength. We're going to assume that Moon Knight maxed out the score, so he got the highest possible rating for every one of these things before his instructor or qualifier was like, hey, stop, you're done, you passed, you're good. If I did it right, I was able to find that the number required for an 18-year-old to get the highest score on pull-ups is 20. We're going to say that Moon Knight is capable of doing at least 20 pull-ups anytime. For the perfect score on a run, I guess he could really just do it as fast as he wanted to, but it seems like 18 minutes for a 5K will give you the highest score. And then for planking, again, he could probably plank as long as he wanted to, but his instructor probably was like, hey, after 4 minutes, you're good, you're done, you maxed it out. So to summarize, Moon Knight can definitely plank for almost 4 minutes. He can do 20 pull-ups whenever he wants. He can run a 5K within 18 minutes whenever he wants. All of these physical capabilities are very easy for him. And that's my assumption for this video. That's what we're going with. So that gives you a standard right here, right now, for you to aim for.
Anyone who makes the night a more dangerous place needs to be taken out.
For combat training, we know that Moon Knight was an underground boxer. He's likely a very good boxer, underground, there's probably fewer rules, maybe it's more intense, and we can assume he did very well. And then of course, Moon Knight has tons of firearm training. He's a firearm expert due to his time as a Marine. If anything, we can say that he actually handicaps himself by not using guns to their fullest extent. There are times where he is more open to killing, there's times where he's less, but in general, he's not going full Punisher. When he is using guns, he's capable of dual wielding. He's able to land accurate shots while holding two guns at the same time, which is extremely difficult in real life. He's good with many different kinds of weapons. With pistols and rifles, he probably got a lot of exposure to a lot of different weapons while he was a Marine and a mercenary. He also has a well-rounded knowledge of pressure points. He uses this to cripple his enemies and disable his opponents before they're able to react to him. I don't think that he learned this as a Marine. It just doesn't seem like something the Army would teach. I would say that this is a sign that he went off to do more combat training after his time as a Marine. He didn't just operate as a mercenary with his current skill level, he went and trained more. Alright, now because of his time as a Marine, you know that he did I'll say this once, the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program. We're going to call it the MCMAP moving forward. The MCMAP is a combat system developed by the United States military, which incorporates hand-to-hand and close quarters combat. It trains Marines in unarmed combat, edged weapons, so knives, bayonets, weapons of opportunity like bricks or rocks or bottles, something heavy you can hit somebody with, and then of course rifles and guns. I personally believe that it is entirely fair to compare this to Krav Maga. And it makes me wonder, maybe it's already happened, but it makes me wonder if the MCMAP will follow the Krav Maga timeline. So basically in a few years, for better or for worse, we might have schools teaching the MCMAP to civilians. Copies of the MCMAP are available online. The version I found was from 2011. And I guess we could say that maybe Moon Knight didn't become a Marine at the time when this was in use, but I don't care. This is what we're going with. Moon Knight absolutely knows the techniques in the MCMAP. And with that, going with the general theme of him being the best at this, he probably held a black belt in the MCMAP. I think it's fair to say that all of these characters that we talk about are some of the very best in their field when it comes to rankings. There's a link for the MCMAP in the description below. If you want to go through it, it has some really interesting stuff. I have some opinions on the legitimacy of some of it.
Bruh.
This is not the video for that. What we can see is that the MCMAP takes a lot from different disciplines. It has quite a bit of boxing, a lot of techniques on punching, which seem to be extremely solid. It's gun disarms. I think you could argue that it has some Judo, some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's not going to have the traditional takes on these martial arts. It's going to take in theory, the most useful techniques, strip it down, and teach it to the soldiers that way. So I'm going to say that Moon Knight probably has a black belt or is the best at all of these martial arts that he could be. And that maybe after he left the Marines and became a mercenary, he went and looked into these styles further. We can see that he's taken some of the strikes that maybe came from karate and he's gone further and he's learned how to use the 3-section staff. So he took the MCMAP as a foundation and he went and explored it further. And that's the best way to really make this type of training work for you. Here we see Moon Knight doing some of what he's learned. He's doing what I believe to be a triangle choke, which he very likely learned in the MCMAP. If we look at high-level boxers, the way they train, we look at the way they fight, we can get an idea of what Moon Knight goes through. Of course, this is going to have well-developed pectorals, triceps, solid rear delts. Those are all the muscles that are involved in throwing a punch and retracting it and bringing it back. And I'm using MMA fights to show examples of boxing rather than boxing fights, just to show how applicable it is when you're fighting an opponent who is not restricted to just using their fists. For BJJ, they do a lot of sparring, which I believe they call rolling. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu can be very taxing on your body, but it can make some very, very lethal fighters. It's really going to involve the entire body, but I would like to believe that this really focuses on your biceps, on your forearms, and on your back muscles. And of course, your core. He has to be a master archer. We see him doing some insane thing where he's shooting an arrow at a sword to split the arrow so that way the two halves hit two different people. It just bonkers stuff. And that only is going to come with mastery over archery. Archery can be very taxing on your back, on your triceps, because that's how you pull the bow back. Those are the muscles involved. The stronger, the heavier the bow weight, the more that you're rowing, the more that you're pressing. Moon Knight also has a ton of gear. It's just ridiculous, honestly, because he's a billionaire. And instead of buying elections, he actually buys fun things that he can use to better the world in his own way. I think that's a better use of his money. We see that he has a moon glider. Of course, he has an entire base of operations where he stores his equipment, where he trains. It's just a freaking mansion where he just hangs out. He's got moon-shaped projectiles that he can either throw or that he can fire from a wrist launcher. He's got knockout spray. Maybe that's chloroform. I don't know if you can have chloroform in a spray type of container. Maybe that's what he uses. He's got cool things where he can release sonic audio attacks. Of course, he has a grappling hook. He has many guns. I do want to circle back to the grappling hook. I'll see if I can find the video. I believe Kyle Hill made it. So Kyle did do the video back when he worked with Because Science. Well, you can see the video here. And basically what he's saying is that at the heaviest point of the swing where the G-forces are the strongest, Spider-Man, who he thinks weighs about 165 pounds, would end up weighing something like 400 pounds. Realistically, that's on the lighter end. And when we try to apply that equation to Moon Knight, who is quite a bit heavier than Spider-Man, we can imagine that the weight is going to end up being a lot heavier. I'm not as good with physics as Kyle, so I'm not going to do the equation. We're just going to have to make an assumption. But yeah, on the light end, using a grappling hook is going to cause you to weigh like 400 pounds. If you want to know what that feels like, you can go weigh yourself down until you're about 400 pounds and try to hang from a pull-up bar. Not even talking about the effect of the G-force and blood flow and passing out. Grappling hooks like this are completely unrealistic. But for Moon Knight, Batman, and those types of people, this is a huge credit to their strength. They are extremely strong, anyone who uses a grappling hook. For the most part, we see that his armor is bulletproof. This kind of depends on where he's at in his vigilante career. I believe in the beginning his suit really was just cloth, but now he's at a point where it's made of this bulletproof metal that is even capable of locking the joints, which can give him an appearance of being stronger than he really is. And I know what I said about the grappling hook, I'm sticking with it, but it's also possible that the suit helps him use the grappling hook without ripping his arm off. So, to summarize, to round this section out, we can say that Moon Knight is a high-level boxer, he's an expert marksman, and he would likely have a black belt in all of the foundational martial arts that the MCMAP uses, along with having a black belt in the MCMAP itself. So, to kind of summarize that a little bit, or to kind of hit the highlights of that, we're going to say that he's a black belt in Judo, BJJ, and Kali, or whatever the equivalent ranking would be.
I'm almost ready, Khonshu. Give me a minute.
For Moon Knight's cardio, we actually have something amazing to work with, and that is his Marine training. That is for the MCMAP, that's to even qualify as a Marine. And then we can also falter to some of his boxing experience. We see that he's fighting as a vigilante a lot. He's fighting multiple people at once, and he's fighting for a long time. This is going to require a high level of cardio to keep him from gassing out within the first 30 seconds and getting stomped. Some of that comes from sparring, from boxing with other people, working the heavy bag, doing the 3-minute rounds, maybe the 5-minute rounds, and just getting good at that. Some of that's going to come from his actual fights, but you wouldn't want to actually fight for your training for cardio. You have too much riding on the line. Now, the main chunk of his cardio training came from him being a Marine. To even apply, you need to be able to run 1.5 miles in 13.5 minutes as a male. For a woman, you need to run 1.5 miles in 15 minutes. Now, to pass the actual physical fitness test, you have to run a 5K. You have to run 3 miles. And you need to get that done at least within 27 minutes and 40 seconds. Of course, I'm saying Moon Knight did it in around 18 minutes, but if you want to even pass, you got to beat that 27:40 time requirement.
Shu, watch over me.
Now, Moon Knight's diet is super interesting because he doesn't always take care of himself. If he's killing and kind of just being a jerk like he can be, he seems to drink a lot. And it's interesting that when he's trying not to kill people, he's trying to be better, trying to be a better friend, be a better partner in relationship, he's drinking less. And I think that is really an excellent message. Alcohol is a cultural thing, at least in America, and I believe in probably everywhere around the world. You can find a spot where drinking is just what you do. And not only does this cloud our decision making when we are drinking, but when we're not, we're just not feeling our best. And that can also affect how we treat other people, and that can affect us physically. Alcohol has a ton of calories in it. And I think it's really interesting, at least in America, that we can find calories listed on almost everything that we buy. But I challenge you, if you're old enough to drink, really keep an eye out for how many servings of alcohol, beers, or vodkas, or whatever, that lists their calorie content. A lot of times, you don't really know how many calories you're drinking unless you put in a lot of effort to look it up. And then, besides calories, alcohol also has many negative effects. I believe that we're saying now that there is no healthy amount of alcohol to consume. Alcohol is a carcinogen. And then from what I've seen in person, sometimes people drink to sleep. So if you have a sleep study, you tell your doctor that that's what you do. The doctor is completely allowed to prescribe that you take alcohol to your sleep study. I've run studies on patients who drink before bed, and some drink a lot. And one consistent thing I see is that their sleep is very poor. So a lot of this, I believe, is just due to the long-term alcohol intake, but some of it, I think, is just for that one acute dose, it messes their sleep up for that night. They tend to have more hypopneas, where their oxygen's desaturating, they're having less oxygen in their blood, and in some cases they are having full-on apneas where there is no airflow at all, and their body's freaking out trying to get that air to move. This can be because the alcohol relaxes the muscles involved in keeping that airway open. I found it very encouraging, very interesting that Marc made a point to stop drinking, at least when he tried to become a better person. So, Moon Knight weighing 225 pounds. For his diet, protein-wise, I would like to see him eat at least 160 grams of protein, all the way up really to 225 grams if he wanted to. Realistically, in real life, I'd recommend maybe 180 grams of protein to 200 grams of protein, just to kind of dial that range in a little bit. Along with his diet, for his caloric intake, I would like for Moon Knight to consistently eat about 3,000 calories a day. Now, this will vary. That's like the mid-range. If he's just going through minions, and just going through a gauntlet of people every day of the week, he's probably going to have to eat much closer to 3,500 calories. This will probably also give him that higher end of that protein where he needs to be eating 225 grams of protein. But if he's doing like investigating or whatever research, then I would recommend that he eat closer to 2,700 calories a day. And then if it's just kind of an in-between, a little mix, 3,000 calories a day should be fine.
Get up, my fist.
A lot of Moon Knight's physiques, a lot of his builds are achievable. Okay, not that one, but in general, he looks like somebody that you could be. Yes, his design does vary from artist to artist, from writer to writer, but there are some runs where Moon Knight actually looks like a soldier. Soldiers tend to not be super overly muscular, maybe every now and then, but in general, they want to select for leaner, muscular, wiry builds. And sometimes Moon Knight looks like that. Just from what we've talked about so far, we see that Moon Knight's lower body has to be pretty muscular. He has to be very strong to survive those impacts, and so he can kick in doors. Along with that, he has specifically strong deltoids, strong triceps, and just in general, a well-rounded, very strong body. I'd argue that he maybe has a pretty realistic body fat level for the activities that he does. A lot of times you see muscles on these superheroes that you're just not going to see on a person who's at a healthy body fat. Normally these characters have body fat levels that are too low. I think there are times where Moon Knight falls into that, but in general, I think you can see some ab definition, some six-packs, but you're not really seeing his serratus. You're not seeing a super tiny waist. He looks like he has a good, healthy build.
I do hear voices in my head. You would too, if you listened.
Alright, now for this man's psychology. This dude is messed up. He has dissociative identity disorder, also known as DID. This is portrayed by certain personalities, such as Steven, blacking out and then waking up, and in that in-between time, another personality has popped out and has taken control of the body. In the comics, a lot of these transitions happen around traumatic events. One time, Moon Knight has a breakdown after killing his brother, who attacked his partner, who caused miscarriage. Just a lot of bad things happened all at once. And next thing you know, he's no longer Steven, he's Marc. He's done trying to be a better person. He is going to go back to his old ways. But what's interesting is, how did Moon Knight get this disorder? Early in the comic timeline, it seemed like these other personalities were really just covers or ways to funnel money. And as our modern comics have developed, we've really locked in on this being a disorder. Normally DID pops up when a child goes through some very specific and very traumatic childhood abuse. Moon Knight didn't really have this type of abuse. I believe in the TV show they kind of dip into that, but even then I think it was still more of a physical abuse. And I'm not saying that doesn't cause the disorder, but it's just typically the disorder is caused by something very heinous and very specific, SVU style. Now, for Moon Knight, he developed his disorder around the time that Khonshu picked him as his future avatar. So we can say that some of it could be due to a mystical divine influence, or it could be due to, as a child, Marc was close with another rabbi, treated him almost as if he was an uncle, and then he stumbles upon this rabbi torturing a man, and Marc has to fight for his own life. But yeah, I think that's pretty traumatic. I could see how that trauma could cause him to respond by developing this disorder. And maybe Khonshu had a role to play as well. Now, my understanding is that in general, the comics probably are not a very realistic portrayal of DID. I believe the show did a slightly better job, but I am not a psychologist, I'm not a professional, and I don't know anyone with this disorder, so I don't really know what this looks like. So all I'll say is take the comics, take the show with a grain of salt, and go and learn about this disorder in case you run into anyone who actually has it, and that can help you to be more empathetic and more understanding of what they're going. And we see that some of his personalities have different temperaments, and I do believe that this is accurate. Some people have an inner child, they have like a guardian type personality, and there might be a couple other personalities involved. For Steven, at least in the show, it kind of seems like Marc is the guardian type personality. In the comics, I think they're all very confident and capable of taking care of themselves. It just comes across that Marc is the more violent personality, where Steven is more, tries to do better, tries to leave more people alive. This is going to be a little bit of a shift, because the point of this is mostly to find motivation to go exercise, and we can do that through looking at characters that we like, but there's also other things that we can learn. What's interesting is Moon Knight has different personalities depending on who's in control, and I think there's something we can take from this. What I'm about to say is not dissociative identity disorder, this is just a mental trick. Sometimes there can be a psychological benefit to playing a specific role. So I found my original source. It's a BBC article that compiles a few experiments about what they're calling the Batman effect, or the alter ego effect. Probably like a self-distancing effect is what they're going to actually end up going with. But in the article, this is where I'm getting these screenshots from, is from this article, which will be linked in the description below. In the article, we can see some examples they give. One experiment, they ask people to do some public speaking, and to see if thinking of themselves in the third person, so instead of thinking, I feel nervous, they think, David feels nervous. And doing this might create some self-distance. And it seems like the results of this experiment lean towards the idea that self-distancing helped with the anxiety. And then Selena Furman, who I think is like the lead researcher for these experiments, I might be wrong on that, but she believes that this concept can help people with weight loss strategies or with helping maintain self-control. And I think for this channel, that's a really fitting concept to dive into. I've linked the article in the description below. Check it out if the concept interests you. So if we're in a situation where we think this is going to be more confrontational, this is going to be aggressive, we might want to go ahead and start getting ourselves into that mindset of the stronger version of us, the version of us that handles fights, that handles confrontations. And on the flip side, we might, have a spouse, a friend, or someone who's going through something very difficult. They're very vulnerable at that time, and we're not the best with emotions. Well, we can fake it till we make it, and we can put on that brotherly, that motherly, that sisterly personality that maybe we're not the best with. We can try and pretend that that's who we are for the moment to allow us to give support to the person who needs it. So it could be helpful to try to have these archetypes, these personalities in mind, and be open to faking it, to playing that role depending on the situation that we're in. And then sometimes we just code switch. Sometimes we're around friends and family members that we've known for a long time, and we're using slang, we're talking, we're moving in ways that we don't normally do when we're around people at work. If you know what code switching is, then you know if you do it. Along with Moon Knight's personality is he's definitely a loner. I wouldn't say that he's introverted. Maybe sometimes he is, depending on who's in control. But it's more that he just doesn't like operating as a team. When he's with the Avengers, he's very quiet, very to himself. And it's kind of clear that he's uncomfortable. However, when he's operating alone, he's quipping, he seems to be truly enjoying the fight. I mean, he will pummel you in the face and roast you at the same time. Like, he's having a good time. It was actually refreshing to see him just enjoy fighting so much. But this is mostly how he is when he is by himself. At most, he might have Frenchie, Jean-Paul Duchamp, I don't know, Frenchie, in his ear, giving him some type of overwatch to help him out. And they seem to be very good friends. There are times where Moon Knight's not the best friend to Frenchie, but they are clearly very comfortable with each other. And you'll still see a true version of Moon Knight when he's with Frenchie. He will still be quipping, he will still be having a great time when he's with his close friends. Another thing that I think Moon Knight shows really well is what can happen when you're trying to be a better person. So in this one run of Moon Knight, possibly in others, but in the one that I read, Steven was trying to be a better person. He was trying to kill less, he was trying to just repaint Moon Knight's image and just do things better. And that's not to say that he didn't want to kill, he didn't want to be overly violent, he wanted that, but he controlled himself. And what's interesting is he had Khonshu on his shoulder, in the corner, just always around, talking about how Steven was never going to be better, how this is not how Steven is, this is not what he was designed to be, and that he is not a good person for faking this, and that he should just go back to how he was. And obviously we don't hopefully have a God talking in our head, but sometimes our own internal voice can be negative. And then along with that, sometimes we can have people in our life, real people in our life, who see that we're trying to do something different, that we're trying to be better, trying to change, and they can be very negative about that. They can say things like, it's only a matter of time until you come back to us, until you come do the things that you always did. And yeah, maybe those are things that we want to do. Maybe that was an integral part of our personality at some point. But like Steven in this situation, we have to always choose to be better for as long as we can. Sometimes something bad happens and it throws us back into our old ways, and that's okay. We should still try to be better. We should try to avoid that, but we definitely want to try to not go back to old habits. And if we do have people in our life, or if we have a lot of negative self-talk in our life pushing us to those bad habits, we might want to look into cutting them out. In this situation, I don't know, it didn't work very well for for Steven, or for Jake to cut Khonshu out, but we have it a little easier in most cases.
I'm the Fist of Khonshu, god of the moon.
Overall, Moon Knight is kind of realistic. I don't think I give ratings. Maybe I should start. I'd give him a rating of a 7. He has a build that reflects the activities that he engages in. He has the build of many soldiers and many different athletes. And then, of course, he's unrealistic in the ways that he's fighting all the time, that he's healing from these things. But that's comic books. That's not what I'm talking about. You know what this is about.
I'm Marc Spector. I'm Stephen Grant. I'm Jake Lockley. And we are Moon Knight.
Alright, now Moon Knight is so freaking rich, it boggles the mind. So Moon Knight is a billionaire. He has access to the best equipment available. He has access to the best of everything available. But I have an issue, because the few times I'm able to see his gym, his workout equipment, it's actually decently low tech, kind of like a couple barbells and dumbbells, just not much to it. So, do I make a routine based off of a rich man who wants to be physically the best for his activities and has access to everything possible? Or do I make a routine for a man who just has a couple barbells? For this specific situation, we're going to go with the former. We're going to look at a routine that requires a solid gym with someone who is really trying to be the strongest, fastest, biggest Marine that they can be. The way we look at all of this, the way I look at every routine is we want a vertical pull, vertical push, horizontal pull, horizontal push, we want a squat type of motion, and we want a hinge. So like a deadlift or something. Any exercise that fills any of those criteria work well, and then the accessory exercises are kind of just based off of what are highlights of this character or what does this character like to do. So like for example, the vertical pull, he's not doing lat pull downs, he's doing pull-ups. That's what he does for his military training or to pass the Marine test. So this routine will have pull-ups. For his vertical pushing, we're probably going to see something along the lines of strict overhead pressing and then phase it out later to do some push pressing and then work back to strict pressing and just go back and forth. For the routine specifically, we're going to be in the push press phase. So that will be his vertical push. For his horizontal push, for the hinge, look at the actual routine. But that's just kind of a hint as to what we're doing. For a character with a lot of free time, I really believe that he would be doing a push-pull leg split. I'm giving him the free time because he's a billionaire. He has time to really hit that push workout hard, then hit the pull, then hit the legs. And then the running is mandatory. You can get a lot of different benefits from cardio. But if you want to be fast, you have to run. An 18-minute 5K time, that's pretty darn fast in my opinion. So running will be a mainstay. You're going to be running realistically, maybe not every day of the week. Probably going to dial it back to a 3 or 4 day a week thing. But yeah, you're going to be running a lot for this routine because that's what Moon Knight would be doing. Moon Knight would be running a lot. So what this could look like is you go for 3 runs a week, maybe 4. If you care more about muscle mass, less about speed, you go for a run 3 times a week. If you care a little bit more about speed, less about muscle mass, go for a run 4 times a week. And then, if you're capable of it, you can do both. You can care about both. You just got to eat a little bit more. For the other parts of the strength stuff, I believe that Moon Knight would take advantage of machines. There's nothing wrong with machines to grow muscle. Sometimes machines can be a little limiting when it comes to strength just because there's some stabilization that's missing. But for this phase, it's just an 8-week program. I could easily see Moon Knight switching to machines for a little bit to rehab or to prehab muscles. A bigger muscle is potentially a stronger muscle. This is the hypertrophy phase. So for the martial art part of the schedule, I'm having us do boxing 3 times a week. Some of the boxing is taking place on upper body days. It's going to be on the pulling days. This is not too big of an issue. Just maybe don't go so hard on the boxing. Always keep it technique focused. If you're sparring, spar lightly. And don't try to kill yourself. Don't try to become the coach's pet during the warm-up workouts. If you do that, if you're eating correctly, it really shouldn't be that big of a deal. And honestly, if you just dig deep, you should be able to give it your best for the boxing and for the pull workouts without any real issue. And also, you see that I have it as boxing. Consider this periodization. It's going to remain boxing until you become a good boxer, until you're happy with where you're at. Now, personally, I would still recommend something closer to kickboxing or MMA, where you can kind of get that best of both worlds, best of everything. But I believe that if you try to excel at boxing for a year or 2 and then switch over to BJJ for a year or 2, I honestly think you will, 1, be able to completely defend yourself in almost every context, and 2, match up with the way Moon Knight typically fights. MMA, it's going to give you those other martial arts that really fit in better, but you can become an excellent fighter just based off of these 2 alone. But yeah, that is it. That's Moon Knight. Don't develop dissociative identity disorder. Don't kill people. And thank you for watching the video. Bye.
Well done, my